In this program, we'll introduce you to the stationary disc and belt sander, what is sometimes called the combination sander. We will describe all the parts and controls and how they affect what operations can be performed. We have included some helpful safety information and a demonstration of some of the most common operations. The stationary sander is actually two separate machines combined into one to share the motor drive mechanism. The stationary sander is one of the most affordable machines in the shop and is either bench or floor mounted. The belt sander has a loop of abrasive material that travels around a pair of drums. The disc sander has a round, flat piece of abrasive material which rotates on a shaft. One motor drives both sanders simultaneously. The stationary sander is used to sand wood, plastics, rubber, cork, and many other materials. The belt sander is most often used to sand flat surfaces, while the disc sander is usually used to sand corners, edges, and small objects. By tilting the table or by adding a miter gauge or sliding guide, stock can be sanded to precise specifications. The disc sander in particular can give square and true edges to pieces of stock. The stationary sander is not an all-purpose tool. It should not be used to remove large amounts of material. Use other woodshop tools that are better designed for this work. The stationary sander should only be used for removing relatively small amounts of material. The stationary sander is a general use tool that many people find very useful. Because it can be used to sand other materials as well as wood, it's used in many industry settings. They're used in furniture and cabinet making shops, in general wood shops and home shops too. They're very safe, very easy to use. They're fairly inexpensive and pay for themselves quickly in time savings. The stationary sander is a fairly safe machine, but still one deserving respect and care to prevent injury. Keep all guards in place whenever possible, and keep the work firmly placed on the table to avoid the stock being thrown from the moving abrasive material. The stationary sander produces more dust than just about any tool in the wood shop. Use the dust collection system and wear proper dust protection whenever you're sanding. We will cover more on safety later. The stationary sander has a base, which is either bolted to the floor or to a bench top. The safety switch is used to turn the motor on. This simultaneously drives both sanders. Even if you're going to use only one sander, the other one will be in motion too. The sanding belt can either be oriented vertically or horizontally, and on some models it can be positioned either way. The belt adjusting knob is used to adjust the tension on the belt and to keep it centered on the drums. The belt guard is usually mounted to protect the operator from the rotating belt. The guard can be removed so that the round end of the belt can be used for sanding concave curves. The belt sander table is used to hold stock securely during sanding operations. Table clamps are used to secure the table in various positions for controlling the angle of sanding. Some tables have a miter slot and will accept the same miters and sliding guides used on other woodshop tools. The sanding disc is a round metal plate on which abrasive discs are glued. Discs are normally oriented vertically. The disc sander table is used to hold stock while it's being sanded by the disc. This table also has a miter slot and clamps for securing it in various positions. The stationary sander puts out lots of dust, and the sanding surface must be kept clean so that optimum sanding action can be maintained. Dust collection systems are designed to remove the dust quickly and efficiently. For small shops and home hobbyists, a shop vacuum can do, but for production work, a dust collection system is mandatory. Sizes for stationary sanders are determined by the size of the sanding belts and discs. Belts are measured by width and length and range from 4 to 6 inches in width and 24 to 60 inches in length. The most common belt sanders are 4 inches by 48 inches. Discs are measured by their diameter and range from 4 to 24 inches. 10-inch and 12-inch disc sanders are common in most shops. The power of a stationary sander is determined by the size of the motor. Motors are relatively small, with 1/2 to 1 horsepower motors being the average. The speed at which the motor turns is usually around 2,000 RPM. The belt speed is measured in surface feet per minute and ranges from around 1,500 to 4,000 surface feet per minute. The disc speed is measured in revolutions per minute and ranges from 1,500 to 4,000 RPM. Many sanders have direct drive motors and only one speed is offered. Other sanders have belt-driven step cone pulleys or adjustable electronic controls for selecting specific speeds. The stationary sander is a relatively safe tool, but like any power tool, you should use caution and common sense to avoid risk of injury or damage to the stock. Avoid loose clothing that might get caught and keep the table free of scraps or loose tools. Wear the proper safety gear and use a dust collection system if at all possible. Make sure the power is disconnected before setting up the sander. Here are a few additional safety rules to keep in mind. Use the sander only for light sanding. The stationary sander is not an all-purpose tool. Do not try to remove large portions of stock. This should be done on other tools specifically designed for the job. The sander should be used to sand only small amounts of material. Check for proper setup. Check to see that the table is adjusted for squareness or for the desired angle and that table clamps are secured. For most operations, the belt guard should be in place and securely fastened. Always keep your hands safe. It's very important to keep your fingers in mind at all times. Maintain a 1-inch safety margin between the sanding surface and your fingers. The stationary sander is not the right tool for sanding small stock. If you need to sand very small pieces, use another tool or sand them by hand. Never force the stock into the abrasive. Keep the stock moving back and forth across the disc or belt. This will prevent the abrasive from heating up or wearing out prematurely. A light pressure is all that's needed. Don't try to speed up the sanding action by applying force. Keep the stock on the table when using the belt sander. Use the table to position the stock against the belt and keep the stock in contact with the table and belt at the same time. If you try to hold the stock freehand against the belt, it might slip or be thrown and your fingers could drop onto the moving abrasive. Sand on the downstroke when using the disc sander. Disc sanding should be done on the downstroke. This pushes the stock down onto the table, which is the safest way to sand on the disc sander. Never leave the sander while it's running. When you turn off the sander, stay with it until it comes to a complete stop. Maintain a clean work area. Clean up all dust and scraps when you're done. In this section of the program, we'll demonstrate how to use the stationary sander. We'll show how to use the belt sander and the disc sander. Before using the belt sander, make sure the abrasive belt is designed for the material you wish to sand. You should also make sure you are not trying to remove a large amount of material. Check the table to see that it's square with the belt. Tighten the table clamp. Rotate the belt by hand and check to see that the belt is properly centered and the tension is adjusted. Clear the table of scrap and loose tools. Make sure the stock is not in contact with the belt. Turn on the motor and let it come up to full speed. Make any required final adjustments to the tension. All flat sanding must be done with one surface against the table. Sand the stock by using a light but firm pressure. If you use too much pressure, you may damage the belt or your stock. Move the material back and forth over the belt. This keeps the belt from wearing uneven and prevents burning of the wood. Never let your fingers get closer than 1 inch from the belt. Use a backup block behind thin materials. To sand concave curves, remove the belt guard. This allows the idler drum to be used as a sanding surface. Be careful though, because without the support of the table, you lose a lot of control. Be sure to sand slowly. The disc sander can be used to sand straight and convex curves on edge. Adjust the table and clamp it into position. Place the work on the table but not touching the disc. Start the motor and wait for it to come up to speed. Move the work into contact with the abrasive disc on the side that's traveling downward. Slowly keep the stock moving back and forth. Remember, the sander is not designed to remove large amounts of material. Always keep the stock on the downward side of the disc. Before we review the basic safety rules for operating the stationary sander, remember that the stationary sander puts out lots of dust. Be prepared with a collection system and personal dust protection. Here are the other safety rules. Use the sander only for light sanding. Check for proper setup. Always keep your hands safe. Never force the stock into the abrasive. Keep the stock on the table when using the belt sander. Sand on the downstroke when using the disc sander. Never leave the sander while it's running. And maintain a clean work area. A stationary sander can cut down the time it takes to perform many sanding operations from hours to minutes. The tables and staging devices will help you to get precise results, and the surfaces will be flat and true. All difficult tasks when sanding by hand. Until next time, remember to have a safe and productive woodworking session.